The Israel Defense Force, IDF, was formed in May 1948, just after David Ben-Gurion had proclaimed the State of Israel. The new force was directly put to the test as different Arab nations invaded the new Jewish state. Yet many men in the newly created IDF did have fighting experience. They had served in different paramilitary groups that originated and operated in the 1920s, 1930s and 1940s. Independence fighters to some, terrorists to others. Keep watching. Good to have you back on the channel. If you're new, my name is Stefan. I'm a Dutch history teacher and I make videos about history for you. If you like that, please consider subscribing and don't forget to hit the notification bell. The three Jewish paramilitary groups that were merged into the IDF were the Haganah, the Irgun and Lehi. To understand how these groups originated, we need to take a look at the background of Mandatory Palestine, what is today known as the State of Israel, and the Palestinian territories were before World War I part of the Ottoman Empire. During World War I, the British took over the area and were keen on making this a homeland for the Jewish people. It was known as British Mandatory Palestine. As Jewish immigration to Palestine increased during the 1920s and 30s, it caused more and more violence with the local Arab communities. The British had their hands full at maintaining order, and violence spiraled out of control. Already in April 1920, violence broke out in Jerusalem. As the Arabs' fears of growing Zionism increased, violence broke out during a Muslim festival. 5 Jews were killed and several hundred injured. 4 Arabs were killed and 18 injured. 7 British soldiers were wounded as well. As a result, the Jewish community in Palestine, the Yishuv, realized they needed to arm themselves in order to protect their communities against Arab violence, as they believed the British were not capable of this. Jewish self-defense organizations did exist already before World War I during the Second Aliyah, which lasted from 1904 to 1914, in which European Jews migrated to Ottoman Palestine in order to live in settlements, kibbutzim. The need for protection rose. Prior to the founding of the Haganah, 2 Jewish militias in Palestine existed. The Bar Giora, founded in 1907, and the Hashomer, founded in 1909. After the 1920 riots in what by now had become Mandatory Palestine, the Yishuv founded the Haganah. The militant organization went on the offensive against both the British and Arab inhabitants of Palestine, but also against other opponents of Zionism. In 1924, the Dutch writer Jacob Israel de Haan, who had been an outspoken advocate of a state in which Jews and Arabs would live as equals, was murdered in Jerusalem. In the 1930s, the Irgun, also known as Etzel, split from the Haganah. There was also the Palmach, and this was an elite unit of the Haganah, founded in 1941. Its goal was to defend the Jewish community in Palestine in case the German Wehrmacht triumphed in North Africa and advanced into Palestine, and to take on the same task by the time the British withdrew in May 1948 from the Mandate of Palestine. Real quick, I have a new YouTube channel. It's called Actual History and focuses on more recent events and its histories. Recently I made a video on the different views on the 2023 October 7th attacks. In case you're curious, check out the link up here or in the pinned comment. Set up by a left-wing party, the Palmach was notionally committed to socialism, and most members shared the kibbutz ethos. However, tensions developed between them and Irgun and Lehi volunteers belonging to right-wing organizations. Nevertheless, such class consciousness was quickly displaced by nationalist sentiment after the end of the Second World War, as the British became targets for military action. By then, Irgun and Lehi had agreed to coordinate their actions with the Haganah. Despite ideological disagreements, the forces now shared the same outlook: a military solution. The Irgun and Lehi were inspired by a right-wing variant of the Zionist ideology. Different forms of Zionism that emerged over the course of the late 19th and early 20th century. In the early 20th century, practical Zionism saw the light of day. Their focus was on immediate settlement and building infrastructure in Palestine regardless of diplomatic progress. There was labor Zionism, or socialist Zionism, with the core idea that the Jewish state should be built through socialist principles, especially Jewish labor and collective agriculture via Jewish settlements, the so-called kibbutzim. This left-wing ideology became dominant in the Yishuv, the Jewish community in Palestine. There also originated a right-wing Zionist ideology that was revisionist Zionism. Its founder was Jabotinsky. Their belief was that Zionism must be militant, nationalist, and assertive. They rejected labor Zionism and demanded the establishment of a Jewish state on both sides of the Jordan River. We shall have a Jewish state with or without the consent of the British, was their slogan, and they believed Jews had the right to defend themselves and were in need of a strong military. Lastly, they advocated mass immigration, especially from Eastern Europe. Jabotinsky laid the ideological foundation for later militant groups like the Irgun. For some time, the revisionists had considered setting up their own defense organization, which was eventually known as the National Military Organization, or Etzel, its Hebrew acronym. The British called it the Irgun, Hebrew for organization. The violent events of the 1929 Arab riots against Jews in Palestine caused a split within the Jewish self-defense group known as the Haganah. A man named Avraham Tehomi felt the Haganah wasn't strong or militaristic enough, so he created a new group called Irgun. He even tried to get Jabotinsky, leader of the revisionist Zionists, to support it. It also included young activists like Avraham Stern. Even though they said they weren't political, most weren't connected to Jabotinsky's youth movement Beitar. Instead, they were drawn to his vision of Jewish national pride and admired past Jewish heroes. Over time, as frustration with British policies grew, Irgun and later Beitar shifted into militant underground groups in the late 1930s, something Jabotinsky himself opposed. This new Jewish force hoped to end dependence on British military protection. Etzel, the founder of political Zionism, had said a Jewish army wasn't a necessary evil, but should be a goal. People like Stern spoke of sacrifice, not dying of old age in a hospital bed, but taking the last bullet to save the Jewish people. They believed Jews should respond to the growing threat in Europe by building a strong force to defend Jewish life and dignity. The events of 1929 had convinced him that moral arguments alone wouldn't protect Jews. Only visible strength would gain the respect of the world. The Irgun also wanted to reinterpret Jewish history to inspire action. Attacks on the British would continue during and after World War II. Most well known is the bombing of the King David Hotel in July 1946, which killed over 90 people. Lehi, better known as the Stern Gang, was a militant Zionist group founded in 1940 by Avraham Stern. Stern, born in 1907 in Suwalki, then the Russian Empire, moved to Palestine in 1925 and studied at the Hebrew University. Influenced by nationalism, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the rebirth of Poland, he was initially drawn to Zeev Jabotinsky revisionist Zionism, which sought a Jewish state on both sides of the Jordan River. However, Stern broke away from the revisionists, rejecting any cooperation with the British, whom he viewed as colonial oppressors, and an obstacle to the creation of a Jewish state. Stern placed himself on the extreme right of the Zionist movement, influenced by European radical nationalism and fascist models. He envisioned a Jewish state that was authoritarian, ethnically exclusive, and ruled by a strong, centralized government. Unlike mainstream Zionists who wanted a democratic refuge, Stern imagined Jews holding absolute power, with Arabs relegated to second-class status. Under his leadership, Lehi embraced terrorism as a legitimate tool, carrying out assassinations, bombings, and robberies. Stern admired authoritarian leaders like Mussolini and even Hitler, not for their racial ideology, but for their ruthless methods and power. Interestingly enough, Lehi reached out to the Nazis for a possible alliance. See the end screen for my video on that. Lehi's most notorious act was the 1944 assassination of Lord Moyne, the British Minister of State for the Middle East. Although Sterren was killed in 1942, his uncompromising vision shaped Lehi's action throughout the 1940s, leaving a controversial legacy of radical nationalism, Jewish supremacy, and the use of political violence in the Zionist struggle. The Haganah, the Irgun, and Lehi would be merged into the IDF in May 1948. When the State of Israel was declared on the 14th of May 1948, the new country immediately faced invasion by surrounding Arab states. To survive, Israel needed a single unified army under government control. Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion was determined that Israel must not have competing militias. On the 26th of May 1948, the provisional government created the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, officially merging all three groups into one national army. The process wasn't smooth. The integration of underground militias into the new Israel Defense Forces, IDF, in 1948 was particularly difficult with the Irgun. While the Haganah and Lehi agreed more quickly, the Irgun only formally disbanded on the 1st of June 1948, pledging to hand over weapons and end independent operations. Tensions soon erupted with the arrival of the Altalena, an Irgun ship carrying arms and fighters. Prime Minister Ben-Gurion ordered the ship's seizure. On the 22nd of June 1948, clashes broke out between Irgun and IDF forces. More than a dozen Irgun members were killed and the Altalena was shelled and sunk. Though Irgun leaders Menachem Begin avoided open rebellion, the crisis exposed deep divisions. Lehi supported the Irgun and accused Ben-Gurion of surrendering sovereignty and called for renewed underground resistance, even aligning itself rhetorically with the Soviet Union against imperialist Western powers. Despite attempts to form a common front with the Irgun, Lehi found itself isolated. Suspicious of the new state's socialist leadership, it doubted whether to pledge loyalty to the IDF at all, insisting allegiance should only be to the freedom of Israel. The Altalena affair thus highlighted the violent struggle to unify Israel's armed forces and the lingering ideological rifts among Zionist factions. Despite tensions, by late 1948, all three groups had been absorbed, creating a unified military that became the backbone of Israel's survival. During the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, also known as Israel's War of Independence, the Jewish militias committed acts of violence and ethnic cleansing against the Arab-Palestinian population. Violence and expulsions have already occurred before, because on April 9th, 1948, when Zionist paramilitaries attacked the village of Deir Yassin near Jerusalem, a massacre took place. Jewish militiamen killed at least 107 Palestinian Arab villagers, including women and children. The attack was perpetrated by the Irgun and Lehi, who were supported by the Haganah and Palmach. This tragedy occurred during the 1947-48 civil war in Mandatory Palestine and was a central component of the Nakba and the 1948 Palestinian expulsion and flight. According to historian Ilan Pape, ethnic cleansing began in early December 1947 with a series of Jewish retaliatory attacks on local villages and neighborhoods. Although sporadic, these attacks were severe enough to cause an exodus of nearly 75,000 of the local Arab population. Over 700,000 Arabs eventually fled or were expelled. This is known as the Nakba, which means catastrophe. Other historians argue that Jewish war plans did not aim to expel Palestinians, but that it was a logical consequence of war. Despite the violent actions, many of the individuals involved in the Jewish militias were eventually integrated into Israeli society. Members played an important role in Israeli politics in the half-century that followed. Yigal Allon, Moshe Dayan, and Yitzhak Rabin were high-ranking members of the Haganah Palmach. Menachem Begin led the Irgun, and Yitzhak Shamir was a prominent member of the Lehi. Three of these men, Rabin, Shamir, and Begin, would later become prime ministers of Israel. Learn about Lehi and their overtures to Nazi Germany. Do check out my second channel and my video on why there has never been a Palestinian state. Thanks for watching.